My greedy husband brought his new mistress, and together, they plotted to end my life and take over my $2.5 million. When I retaliated, they locked me in a room and prepared to set it on fire. I immediately called the police, but before they arrived, a shocking surprise awaited them. My name is Sophia Anderson, and for most of my life, I believed I was one of the lucky ones. I'm 35, a doctor living in Chicago, and for 8 years, I thought I had a marriage built on trust and mutual respect. My husband, Ryan, was my partner in every sense of the word, or so I thought. He's 38, an entrepreneur with grand ideas and ambitions. Together, we had built a comfortable life. Or, at least, that's the illusion I clung to. Looking back now, there were signs, subtle ones, whispers of something not quite right. But when you're in love, it's easy to explain things away. Late-night business meetings? Ryan was just working hard for our future. Money missing from our joint account? He said it was temporary, a necessary investment for his business. I trusted him implicitly. I believed in our marriage, in him. It all began to unravel one evening, a quiet Sunday when Ryan was out. I was sorting through some paperwork in our home office, looking for an insurance document, when I stumbled upon something I wasn't supposed to see, a bank statement for an account I didn't recognize. At first, I thought it was a mistake, but as I read through the numbers, my stomach twisted. There were transfers, large ones, totaling nearly $2.5 million. The dates and amounts didn't match anything we had discussed, and the name on the receiving account was unfamiliar, Amanda Blake. I sat there, staring at the paper, my mind racing.
Who was Amanda Blake?
Why was Ryan sending her money, our money? For a moment, I convinced myself there had to be an explanation. Maybe it was business-related, I thought. But deep down, I knew something was very, very wrong. The next few days were a blur of confusion and denial. I couldn't bring myself to confront Ryan outright. Instead, I played the role of the supportive wife, all the while keeping my eyes open. And then I found more emails, receipts, and pictures. Amanda was no business associate. She was his mistress, a 28-year-old event planner who appeared to be living the high life, funded by my husband's deceit. The extravagant trips, designer clothes, and luxury apartment? All courtesy of Ryan. But the worst discovery came when I realized this wasn't just about infidelity. Ryan wasn't just betraying me emotionally, he was planning to leave me with nothing. Every financial move he made was calculated, siphoning money from our accounts, putting everything in his name, and ensuring that when he walked away, I'd be left with scraps. My entire future, everything I had worked for, was being stolen right under my nose. I couldn't cry, not at first. The anger was too raw. Too overwhelming. I felt like a fool, like my entire life had been a lie. But as the initial shock wore off, I knew I couldn't let him win. I wasn't going to sit back and watch him destroy me. If Ryan wanted a fight, he was going to get one. I started small, careful not to tip him off. During the day, I continued my work at the hospital, saving lives and pretending everything was fine. At night, I became a different person, quietly gathering evidence, piecing together the full extent of Ryan's betrayal. I learned to hack into his accounts, uncovering more than I ever expected. It wasn't just our joint assets he was draining. Ryan was involved in something far bigger: fraudulent activities, money laundering, even tax evasion. The money he was funneling to Amanda wasn't just ours. It was dirty money, the kind that could destroy his entire business and land him in prison. I felt sick, but also a strange sense of power. For the first time in months, maybe years, I wasn't the clueless wife anymore. I had the upper hand. But I also knew I couldn't do this alone. The deeper I dug, the more dangerous Ryan's schemes seemed. I needed help. That's when I reached out to Detective James Carter, a seasoned officer specializing in financial crimes. I remember sitting across from him in a small, dimly lit office, clutching the folder of evidence I had gathered. "I need your help," I told him, my voice trembling but firm. "My husband, he's stealing from me, and I think he's breaking the laws." Detective Carter listened patiently as I laid it all out: the secret account, the mistress, the fraudulent activities. He didn't interrupt, didn't judge. When I finished, he leaned forward, his expression serious. "Sophia, this is bigger than you realize. If what you're saying is true, your husband could be facing serious prison time. But you need to be careful. Men like this don't go down without a fight." His words sent a chill through me, but I nodded. I was ready. I had to be. There was no turning back now. Over the next few weeks, we worked together in secret, building a case against Ryan. I installed software on his laptop to track his activity, recorded phone calls, and even pretended to support his latest business venture to get closer to the truth. It was exhausting, living this double life, but I didn't have a choice. Ryan, oblivious to my plans, continued his charade. He smiled at me over dinner, talked about our future, and even had the audacity to bring Amanda into our home when he thought I was working late. I stayed quiet, biding my time, waiting for the right moment to strike. But I knew that moment wouldn't come easily. Ryan wasn't stupid, and the closer I got to the truth, the more dangerous he became. I could feel it, a tension growing between us, an unspoken suspicion in his eyes. He didn't know what I was up to yet, but he was starting to sense that I wasn't the naive, trusting wife he had built his plans around. And that's when I realized the true extent of what I was up against. Ryan wasn't just my husband, he was my enemy, and I was about to go to war. When you live with someone for 8 years, you get to know their rhythms, the little habits, routines, and quirks that make up daily life. But in those weeks after discovering Ryan's betrayal, I saw him in an entirely different light. Every smile, every casual comment, every touch felt like a mask hiding the monster underneath. And the hardest part? I had to wear a mask of my own. I continued gathering evidence with Detective Carter, all while pretending nothing had changed. Some nights I would sit at the dinner table, nodding along to Ryan's stories about clients and deals, knowing full well those clients didn't exist, and those deals were just money being funneled into Amanda's lifestyle. Ryan thought he was untouchable. He'd always been charming, the kind of man who could walk into a room and instantly win people over. That charm had fooled me for years, and now I realized it wasn't just me. He had fooled everyone. His colleagues, his friends, even our families. He was a master manipulator, and I was determined to beat him at his own game. But it wasn't easy. The more evidence I gathered, the more dangerous it became. Ryan was meticulous, always covering his tracks, and any slip on my part could have been disastrous. I couldn't afford to let him suspect anything, not yet. So, I played the role of the supportive wife perfectly, even as my anger simmered beneath the surface. One night, while Ryan was out on another one of his business meetings, I broke into his study. My hands trembled as I searched through his desk, his files, his computer. That's when I found it, the ledger. It was hidden in a locked drawer, buried under a stack of old documents. Inside, every transaction was meticulously recorded. The transfers to Amanda, the offshore accounts, the shell companies he used to launder money. It was all there. I took pictures of every page, my heart pounding with each snap of the camera. This was the smoking gun, the proof I needed to take him down. But it wasn't just the money. As I flipped through the pages, I found names, business associates, clients, even politicians, people tied to Ryan's schemes. It wasn't just about me anymore. Ryan was part of something much bigger, something dangerous. The weight of it all hit me that night as I sat alone in our bedroom, staring at the evidence I had collected. This wasn't just a betrayal of our marriage. It was a web of lies and crimes that could destroy lives. And I was in the middle of it. The next day, I met with Detective Carter. "This is more than just financial fraud," I told him, handing over the photos of the ledger. "Ryan's connected to people, powerful people. If we're going to take him down, we need to be careful." Carter nodded, his expression grim. "You've done incredible work, Sophia. But you're right. This isn't just about your husband anymore. We're going to need a solid plan, and you need to be prepared for the fallout." The fallout. Those words stayed with me. As much as I hated Ryan, part of me still struggled with the idea of what I was about to do. This was the man I had loved, the man I had built a life with. Exposing him meant destroying everything we had, everything I thought we stood for. But there was no other way. He had made his choices, and now he had to face the consequences. As Carter and his team worked on their end, I focused on keeping up appearances. It wasn't easy. Ryan was growing more suspicious, watching me more closely. He'd ask questions about my work, my schedule, even my mood. "You've been distant lately," he said one night, his eyes narrowing as he studied me. "Is everything okay?" I forced a smile, pretending to be hurt. "You're the one who's always busy, Ryan. I barely see you these days. Maybe I'm just feeling lonely." It worked for the moment, but I could see the doubt in his eyes. He wasn't convinced, and I knew I had to be more careful. The tension between us reached a boiling point a few days later. Ryan came home unexpectedly in the middle of the day, catching me off guard as I was going through his laptop. I barely had time to close it before he walked into the room. "What are you doing?" he asked, his voice sharp. "Just checking emails," I lied, my heart racing. "The hospital's been sending updates about the new schedule." He didn't respond, just stared at me for a long moment. Then, without a word, he walked over and took the laptop from me. My hands clenched into fists as I watched him. He didn't say anything, but his silence spoke volumes. He was suspicious, and I had just made things worse. That night, I barely slept. Every sound, every creak of the house made me jump. I couldn't shake the feeling that Ryan was watching me, waiting for me to slip up again. And then, just when I thought things couldn't get worse, I found out he had brought Amanda into our home. I came home from a late shift at the hospital to find a pair of unfamiliar heels by the front door. My stomach dropped as I heard voices, Ryan's deep and familiar and a woman's, soft and flirtatious. I froze in the hallway, listening as they laughed together in the living room. For a moment, I wanted to storm in, to scream at them both, to tear the whole charade apart. But I didn't. Instead, I turned around and walked out the door, my hands shaking with rage. I couldn't let them see me like this, not yet. When I finally got home hours later, the house was empty, and Ryan was in bed, pretending to be asleep. I stood in the doorway, staring at him, my heart pounding with a mix of fury and fear. He didn't know it yet, but his time was running out. The game we were playing was dangerous, and I knew it was only a matter of time before everything came to a head. But I wasn't going to back down. I had come too far to stop now. Ryan thought he was untouchable, but he was wrong. And I was going to prove it. The night I came home to find Amanda's shoes in my house was a turning point. It wasn't just the betrayal, it was the audacity. Ryan didn't even bother to hide it anymore. He was bringing his mistress into our home, the place we had built together. That night, as I stood in the cold outside our house, I made a decision. This had to end. And it had to end soon. Detective Carter had warned me to be careful, and he was right. Ryan's behavior was becoming more erratic. He was on edge, his temper flaring at the smallest things. One morning, he snapped at me over breakfast because the coffee was too hot. "You can't even do this right, Sophia," he muttered, slamming his mug down. I didn't react. I couldn't afford to. But inside I was seething. I knew the walls were closing in on him. The investigation was gaining momentum, and Carter's team was preparing to move. We had everything we needed. The ledger, the transfers, the evidence of fraud. The plan was simple: catch Ryan red-handed, with no room for escape. But I hadn't anticipated how dangerous he would become as the noose tightened. One evening, Ryan came home earlier than usual. His face was flushed, his movements frantic. He stormed into the living room, where I was reading, and threw a folder onto the coffee table. "Explain this," he demanded. I looked down and saw a printout of my recent phone records. My stomach sank. He had seen the calls to Detective Carter. "I don't know what you're talking about," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Don't lie to me, Sophia," he hissed, his voice low and threatening. "I know you've been talking to someone. Who is it? A lawyer? A private investigator? Do you think you're smarter than me?" His words sent a chill through me, but I refused to show fear. "You're paranoid, Ryan," I said calmly. "Maybe if you spent less time sneaking around with Amanda, you'd realize how ridiculous you sound." For a moment, he was stunned into silence. Then his face twisted in rage. "You think you can play games with me?" he shouted, stepping closer. "You think you're going to win?" Before I could react, he grabbed my arm, his grip tight and painful. "You don't know who you're dealing with, Sophia," he said, his voice cold and venomous. You've made the biggest mistake of your life. I managed to pull away and ran to the bedroom, locking the door behind me. My heart was pounding as I dialed Carter's number. It's happening, I whispered, my voice shaking. He knows. I think he's going to hurt me. Carter's response was immediate. Stay locked in that room. We're coming. The minutes felt like hours as I waited, listening to Ryan pacing outside the door, shouting threats. When I finally heard the sound of sirens, relief flooded through me. The police burst in, arresting Ryan before he could do any more harm. As they led him away, his eyes met mine, filled with fury and disbelief. You'll regret this, Sophia, he spat. I swear, you'll regret it. But I didn't regret it. Not for a second. For the first time in months, I felt safe. The nightmare was finally over, or so I thought. The moment Ryan was taken away in handcuffs should have felt like the end of the nightmare. But as I watched him being driven off, his threats still ringing in my ears, I knew this was far from over. The web of lies he had spun was too vast, too tangled, to unravel in one single night. My fight wasn't finished. It was just shifting to a new battleground. Detective Carter and his team wasted no time. With Ryan in custody, they raided his business offices and uncovered even more than we had anticipated. Hidden accounts, forged documents, and ties to an underground network of illegal activities came to light. Ryan hadn't just been siphoning money for Amanda's luxurious lifestyle. He had been laundering money for some very dangerous people. His entire empire was built on deceit and crime. I should have felt vindicated, but instead, I felt a strange emptiness. This was the man I had loved, the man I had once dreamed of building a life with. Now, everything about him was a lie. The house we shared, the vacations, the laughter, it all felt tainted. But I didn't have time to dwell on it. The legal process was swift, and I had a role to play. The trial was a spectacle. Ryan's crimes shocked everyone. Our friends, our families, even Amanda. She showed up on the first day, dressed in designer clothes, looking every bit the part of the mistress who had thought she was winning. But as the evidence mounted, her smug demeanor crumbled. She wasn't just a pawn in Ryan's schemes. She was a willing participant, and she, too, faced consequences for her involvement. I testified in court, laying out everything I had discovered. It wasn't easy, standing there under the weight of Ryan's gaze, his fury palpable even from across the room. He refused to look at me most of the time, but when he did, his eyes were filled with hatred. He wasn't sorry. He wasn't remorseful. He was only angry that he had been caught. The judge didn't hold back. Ryan was sentenced to a lengthy prison term, and Amanda received her punishment as well. But it wasn't just about their crimes. It was about the lives they had destroyed. Ryan's business associates were implicated, employees lost their jobs, and families were affected. The fallout was immense, but justice had been served. In the months that followed, I began to rebuild my life. It wasn't easy. The media frenzy around the case meant I couldn't escape the whispers, the stares. People treated me like a victim, and in a way I was. But I refused to let that define me. I had survived and I had fought back. That was what mattered. With the help of a good lawyer, I recovered most of the stolen assets. Ryan had tried to leave me penniless, but in the end, his plans failed. I sold the house, the one that had become a symbol of betrayal, and moved into a cozy apartment downtown. It wasn't extravagant, but it was mine, a place where I could start fresh. Detective Carter became a surprising source of support during this time. He reminded me that what I had done, standing up, fighting back, was no small feat. Most people wouldn't have had the courage to do what you did, he told me one afternoon. You not only saved yourself, but you helped us uncover something far bigger. His words stayed with me. For so long, I had felt powerless, like a pawn in Ryan's twisted game. But I had taken that power back, piece by piece, until it was mine again. One day, as I sat in my new home, sipping coffee and looking out at the city, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. The scars Ryan had left, emotional and physical, were still there, but they didn't define me anymore. I was stronger, wiser, and ready to move forward. Ryan's arrest had been the climax, but my story didn't end there. It was a story of betrayal, yes, but also of resilience and justice. It was about refusing to be a victim, about fighting for the truth even when it seemed impossible. And, in the end, it was about reclaiming my life. I often think about what I would say to the woman I was before all of this. Naive, trusting, blind to the cracks in her world. I would tell her that betrayal doesn't have to break you. That sometimes, the hardest battles lead to the greatest strength. And that no matter how dark things seem, there's always a way to fight back. Because that's what I did. I fought. And I won.